United Nations reports that we're facing the highest number of violent conflicts since the Second World War. Airstrikes in Yemen expand tensions in the Middle East and draw Britain and America in deeper, risking an even wider conflagration. The war in Ukraine rages on and fighting in Gaza continues. So how dangerous are the times we're living in? Are we on the precipice of a third world war? To discuss the geopolitics of 2024, we were joined by the global security expert, Professor Peter Jackson. Peter, we're hearing about senior politicians talking about us being closer to World War III. What is the state of play just now, do you think? Where are we?
Well, John, I think that there's a lot more instability in the world than there has been over the past two and a half decades. But I don't think we're at a stage where we need to worry about World War III just yet.
So where are the flashpoints? What's happening just now?
Well, I think in broad terms, what we're seeing is the gradual unraveling of the post-Cold War rules-based international order, of which both the United States and the UK were important pillars. And I think we're seeing the emergence of new powers and powers that have an interest in that order unraveling. First, China and India are emerging as major actors on the international stage, and Russia is trying to reassert itself as a regional and probably even a global great power.
What are these rules you were talking about, post-Cold War rules?
I think probably you'd say they established the guardrails for state behavior in the aftermath of the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union. International law was much more important, as well as key norms, kind of unspoken rules about states not using violence against other states unless they were failed states and unless it was the major actors in the international system using the violence. But now I think, especially since the retreat of American power in Afghanistan and the decision by Russia to invade Ukraine, that really has shown that we're moving into a new and probably far less stable world.
We've got Ukraine, we've got what's going on at Gaza, continual talk of Taiwan, for example. All of these dreadful in humanitarian terms, but in geopolitical terms, which one of these could be, or what other one could be what sparks things to become more serious?
Well, in the short term, I suppose one worry is the escalation of the Israel-Hamas conflict into a regional conflict that will draw in Iran and possibly even the United States. I think that there's always a possibility that might happen. There are missile exchanges between Israel's proxy actors and Hezbollah and Israel in northern Israel, southern Lebanon. There are also the Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. And there are also Iranian missiles, ballistic missiles, being fired into Syria and Iraq and often targeting U.S. assets in that region. And there is always the chance that if one of those missiles kills enough American personnel, military personnel, that might draw the United States into a regional conflict, but I don't see that as very likely in the short term. Just
talking about the United States then, possibility of Donald Trump becoming president later this year, how will that change the dynamic, if that happens?
I think it would be in some ways revolutionary, because it's pretty clear from what Donald Trump has said himself and the Republican Party that American aid for Ukraine would cease. And this would mean that the European countries that were willing to do so would have to step in, and the United States has provided the vast majority of munitions and equipment and arms.
So ultimately, would the world be a less safe place?
Exactly. I think that what would happen would be that if Russia was able to triumph in Ukraine, it would emerge in the medium term as stronger and pose a real and serious threat to Eastern Europe and to the Baltic states, a threat that because of NATO, a country like Great Britain would be forced to intervene. And that is a real danger in the medium term should Donald Trump be elected in November. I also think that the chances of some kind of an amicable, or at least a settlement that promotes regional stability over the Taiwan Straits, I think that that would become much less likely. Donald Trump dealt with China was much more robust and blunt in his dealings with the Chinese government, and I have a real sense that in the medium term, the Taiwan Straits and northeastern Europe would be two major flashpoints of tensions that could result in very serious conflicts. You could see that in the future.
Very briefly and finally, we're expecting the doomsday clock announcement to be made tomorrow. I thought that was a blast from the past, but that still exists. What are we expecting from that? Should we be optimistic?
It depends. I mean, the doomsday clock has been, in the past, sometimes hard to predict. My own view is that the real threats to global stability and global peace are probably in the long term. But there is every possibility that the Middle East will continue to be roiled with conflict in the near future. Iran's flexing its muscles and trying to assert itself as a regional power. And I don't see the problem of Russia and its determination to overturn the international order. I don't see that going away anytime soon either, John, I'm afraid.
Peter Jackson, thanks for joining us in Scotland tonight.